When I got into leadership, one of the key things that I wanted was to be that manager that I never really had. And that's someone that actually walks in every day and gives a damn about their people. I would say that that's a problem that most first-time VPs or directors or whatever that come out of a bigger company and they move to a startup and they think that they can, take the same playbook and adapt it to whatever environment they're in. It's really hard to unlearn bad habits. So a lot of the senior leadership at a lot of these companies that continue to do things, the things that people were doing 5-10 years ago don't work today, or a lot of it doesn't work today. You need to kind of adapt.
If there's only one thing new VPs can focus on when it comes to coaching, what would that be?
So one of the things I've learned over the years is
Hello everyone, this is Michael Ocean, founder and CEO of Sell in the Span. Today I have a great guest, Mr. Chris Nashed, or we call him Chris Nash. So a little bit of background about Chris. He's been leading sales for over 10 years. He's an expert in taking early stage startups beyond product market fit. And he's currently the VP of revenue at Go, helping with performance marketing for insurance agents. And a fun fact, he's actually our advisor. And I remember, I reached out to Chris about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And that's another story. We got to
that
get
long
into
already?
Yes, sir. So how are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing good, Michael. Thanks for having me, man. Happy to be here.
Of course, I appreciate you. So, Chris, before we get started talking about individual coaching and why it matters, just tell us a little bit about your background so people get to know you a little bit better.
Sure. So I've been in some kind of sales role since I was 13 or so. Was in retail for a long time, through high school, early part of college. But I got into tech 9 years ago with a company called EverQuote, also in the insurance space. And that was my first foray in tech sales. So it was the first time I ever made a cold call. First for a lot of things. And it was a great experience, learned a lot. Spent 6.5 years of my career there. I was able to help them scale their inside sales, got to experience my first IPO. So lots of firsts there. And so, but yeah, and here we are.
There we go. So. Yeah, all the fun stuff. Look, Chris, we're kind of like cheating a little bit because we know each other very well. At some point in time, you join us as a go-to-market advisor, and I think you deeply care about coaching because one of the things I remember from very early days, you asked me, how do other sales leaders react to this? And I told you, many don't give a damn. And you got angry. So I want to go back to that day, if you remember, and just ask you, why? Why did it mean so much to you that it got you even frustrated?
Well, I think we've all worked for what I would consider bad managers, right? Sit behind a desk, point fingers. They set the bar really high, but don't actually enable you to achieve that bar, right? Until you're failing or you're on a PIP or something along those lines. And so, when I got into leadership, one of the key things that I wanted was to be that manager that I never really had. And that's someone that actually walks in every day and gives a damn about their people. And that's leadership, right? And so what frustrated me was when I saw what you had, mind you, is very different than the product today, right? I could see where it was going. And so, one of the hardest things being any kind of leader, whether you've been in that business for X number of years or you're brand new into the business, it's trying to put your people in a position to understand how to engage with your customers and sell the value of the product, understand what what that client or prospect is trying to achieve, how that aligns with your product, all of those things. And a lot of times I would see managers just, toss them with a rep, right? Yeah, I learned from this guy. He knows what he's doing. It's going to be great. And which is fine to some degree, but there wasn't a whole lot of follow-up. And so, but it becomes, what I did understand though, is that it becomes really hard to coach individuals when you've got a team of 10 reps and everybody's got a different pace, different flow, different thing that kind of resonates that can get them to have that aha light bulb moment. And so, I don't specifically remember that exact day and that feeling, right? But we've all been there, done that with poor managers that have, again, they set the bar, but don't actually guide you to that path down to actually achieve whatever expectations they have. Personally, just never understood that, because putting in the work up front, getting your team to be really, really good is just going to make your life as a leader that much easier, right? And so what I find, though, is that leaders don't want to, a lot of them just didn't put in the time for whatever reason. They're just overpaid people that sit behind a desk, scream really loud, but when push comes to shove, they're going to throw their people under the bus and never take self-accountability for poor performance or what have you. And that's just not part of, personally, like my ethos, right? When things go sideways in the business, even if it was a rep or a team or what have you, okay, they ultimately roll up into me. So that's a reflection on me as a leader. So what did I do incorrectly or wrong that brought us to this point? And accept that as the reason and try to overcome those issues versus just put the onus on the team. Be like, yeah, my team they just totally sucked this month, and I don't know. I think they're going to go on a PIP, and I don't know. I guess let's start interviewing or whatever, right? So anyway, I could ramble on that for days.
That makes a lot of sense. Look, we care about things sometimes because of what happened to us, because of our own experiences. I want to put you on the spot. Would you say you received effective coaching being a rep before you actually got into leadership position?
Effective is a relative term. I would say, so I'll give you a great example. Okay. I don't know if it's a good thing for me to admit this or not, but when I was a rep at EverQuote, okay, I was probably 2-3 months in, I hadn't closed anything. Okay. And they ultimately moved my seats, like my desk, to sit right where I had like our enablement person kind of sitting behind me just to listen to my calls. And so, but I was on a PIP, like they put me on a PIP, but they're like, look, we're going to put you with this person. If they can't figure you out, dude, like it's just not going to work. Right.
Scary.
And so, and I'd be sitting on the sales floor and I'd be listening to these other folks on the phone. I'm like, nobody's doing anything uniquely different than what I thought I was doing. Right. But it was literally that moment where I had our enablement manager sitting behind me, where he just gave me this one piece of feedback. He's just like, you had her and you just kept selling. Like when you've got the commitment, just stop talking and keep moving. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's when I had that bit of an aha moment. It's like, well, crap, I'm basically talking myself out of a ton of deals because I don't know when to stop selling. And I'm basically divulging information I'm not even asking for, and now I'm just prolonging the sales cycle, right? Mm-hmm. So I had that kind of that light bulb moment start, and then I just went on a run, and everything was great. And so, to answer your question in the longest way possible, in that moment, at that point where it was basically the difference between me being employed and not being employed, yeah, I felt like I had effective coaching, right? But still, a lot of that was self-reflection. It's not so much that there was any one unique thing that somebody said. It was like, that one thing kind of just put me over the top, but it was the lead into that. It was the 10, 15, 20 things that had been mentioned to me leading up to that moment that all just kind of came together, right? Mm-hmm. So yes and no. Now the challenge there is that we basically had to wait until, oh crap, like there's a problem here and we need to figure out if he's gonna make it or if we need to ship him out and backfill or whatever, right? And that to me is the thing that's so wrong with enablement in general, right? And this is not to poo-poo on enablement people, because I think for the most part their intentions are good. A lot of that stuff would trickle down from the top, right? Specifically in that environment, I don't think a lot of people really understood the value of enablement. And I still feel like that's a little bit of a thing that is combated today, right? But when the push comes to shove, we figured it out. And so, but I think it would have been a lot better had we had a lot of that material or enablement sessions or peer reviews or role plays or whatever. Like no sales reps like to do role plays, right? But in that environment, when you're primarily on the phone engaging with customers, and that was a time where we didn't do Zoom stuff. It's just you're on the phone and you're asking them to spend money with you. that requires a bit of tact and skill, right, in order to do that effectively and consistently. And so it would have been, I think, a lot more helpful to have more, after the initial training and onboarding, right, you get through all the stuff where it's primarily industry related material or product related material, but it was never focused on really the persona that we were selling to beyond just here's who you sell to and here's kind of what they care about. But it really didn't dive all that deep,
Mm.
right? And so what would have been really great is to have that ongoing, some degree, some frequency or cadence to where there was some kind of follow-up after that initial training that didn't wait until I was failing to figure out if they could help me.
Yeah. Look, I think unfortunately, like we're, I think talking about what, 10 years ago. So your story
Yeah,
is
nine
from
years. Yeah.
yeah, almost a decade ago, and
Mm-hmm.
people still practice the same. Not everywhere, obviously. I think people are more aware because the market shift we're seeing, like past 2 years, we need to change. When
Sure.
otherwise we are irrelevant. But everything is very reactive. Okay, he screwed it up. Let's just put it on paper or whatever. Let's just get rid of him, and we don't even understand the costs associated with losing someone with organizational, knowledge
Mm-hmm.
instead of like planning this as a continuous process. So it's just like you got your training, check. So you dump some material, learn about the product, and to your point, very little about your buyer and a lot about your product and other aspect of your business, something that you
Mm-hmm.
care about. And then we expect sellers to actually perform at the highest level.
To be fair, too, and I'm sure this is constant today, you just get so overloaded with information in those initial trainings. So if my enablement person from EverQuote's like, watch this thing, like by no means am I saying you did a bad job. There was a lot of great information, but it was a lot all at once and packing it into like 3 days worth of training and then throwing on the floor. And there wasn't as much consistency on that follow up. Like there wasn't that continuing education type path, right? To really also challenge the reps around like, well, what did you retain
Mhm.
out of all of that? And trying to figure out like where are those gaps. And that was one of the things, I'm sure we'll get to it, but that was kind of one of the things that was interesting to me when we first met with the initial iteration of your product was it kind of helps you fill some of those gaps for individuals. And so, it would have been great if I had SMTP back in those days. Maybe I wouldn't have been on a PIP.
you
Yeah.
know, I think it's twofold. It's like, to me, what I'm seeing right now and hearing from other people sharing is that first and foremost, enablement does not have that strategic power. So it comes from the top. Your training with this new batch is, 1 week, get it done. Just wrap it up. They don't have that power to really go through reinforcement. So what happens is then we have to get frontline managers to do that job of coaching, continuous coaching, if you will. And then I go back to my own experience. Honestly, I don't even remember when was the last time when I was a rep and I would get real coaching, focusing on me, improving
Mm-hmm.
my performance. It was always about them. Let's go to your pipeline and let's start digging to these deals. Do you want
Totally.
to call them right now in front of me? I was like, no, it's going to ruin my relationship. Why would I call them?
Right.
So I think it's just a company culture. Do they really have this like coaching culture, or is just a checklist of tasks that we brought someone called enablement, and we look at them as just a one-off trainer rather than someone who can actually build something that is more continuous because we don't even give them that power to do this. All right. Look, you work with large organizations. EverQuote, you started as a seller, then you got into management position, and also you work with startups. I remember at the time you were at LeaseCake, and it was a tiny little company. You got them to genuinely be on product market fit. So you guys were revenue positive. You were hiring. I remember even like initially when we talked about you hired 2 3 people and said, look, I
Mm-hmm.
have my reps and I'm hiring more. So using both side of the spectrum, from tiny little startups trying to figure things out to more established, more structured companies, how would you
Mm-hmm.
differentiate coaching between these two? Like especially when we talk individual coaching, so size matters, I guess, in this context.
Yeah. So the big at like an EverQuote, for example, when I became a sales manager, I took on a team of I think it was like 9 or 10 sales reps, and they were all green, right? Brand new, didn't know what was in front of them. And so quite honestly, that was to my benefit, right? Because there was less things they had to unlearn and bad habits they had to unlearn and things like that. And they were, moldable clay, as they like to say, right? And so that was a little bit easier for me to be able to kind of dive in and to figure out within each individual, what was their sort of reason for being? Like, what was really exciting about the opportunity, right? And independent of like, have you sold stuff before? Like, I don't really care. Okay. To me, sales is a skill. And it also aligns with whether or not you actually have a personality where you want to talk to people and you can actually engage and have a real conversation with no desired outcome, right? And so being able to split that up and do all that like made things a little bit easier. But what was interesting was what I learned was that there were some gaps in our enablement process. I would go to our enablement person, be like, hey, like, I think my team needs this, and this, blah, 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 whatever it might be. But then coming from the top, they're like, no, we need you to refocus on this. We have a new product feature that we're going to roll out, or we have a new whatever, right? And so, and this was really before I was really what I would consider a far more proficient student of the game, right? I hadn't done a ton of reading up until that point. It was more so like my selling was more so just I talked to people like I would want them to talk to me, right? And again, my intention was to try to figure out if I could solve a problem or not, right? But what I figured out really quickly was that, with the big companies, everything's just bottom line driven. And so, and then the focus is less about the people and how can we get them to be highly proficient in executing a game plan with what we have in place today before we layer on more crap for them to figure out. Nah, not important. Let's just prioritize the new product feature that really at the end of the day, like didn't matter, that was really frustrating. That was very eye-opening for me, even at a big company where like we have the headcount, we have the resources at our disposal, but we're not deploying those resources as effectively, as efficiently as possible for the betterment of the team that they're really hired to train and enable, right? And subsequently go to the polar opposite. When I went to LeaseCake, there was one seller that had been there for a year or two, and that was it. Like there was really no systems, no process. And so building all that from scratch, and that was kind of my first gig where I didn't have a lot of that structure. And that was really challenging to come into an environment where I had never sold the product before. I didn't really understand the buyer persona. I didn't understand the nuances of the respective elements of our product and the things that we solve for, be able to properly enable the seller that I had, right? But so that was somewhat of a disadvantage. But then the advantage there was I wanted to focus more on like sales skills, right? So I implemented really like a methodology at that point. I introduced gap selling, big fan of that process, right? Find a problem. If there's no problem, then what are we really selling, right? And got him to a point where he could then take the immense amount of product knowledge that he had, but be a far better seller, a more well-intentioned seller at the end of the day. But obviously, two of the disadvantages, like, when you come in and you haven't really sold in that environment, you don't really understand that buyer, it is harder to build some credibility with, even if it's just a single seller, right? You're like, well, why the hell do I have to listen to you? Why? Just because you came from this other place and sold this other thing to other people that have nothing to do with what we're doing? Like, what are you going to do for me? And so that's why I really wanted to pivot to more structure, method, right? Intention and all of that. And then the other stuff can kind of come in after, right? But then you start to layer in more people. So when I started to hire, luckily for me, I tend to take good care of the people that I manage. And so when I jumped to LeaseCake, I was able to recruit some folks over that had worked for me. And so that was an advantage in that they were known commodities. I know how they operated. I know what they cared about. Like I knew where their potential gaps were going to be, bringing them into a new environment. So that was an advantage. But the disadvantage that I had is because I hadn't ever sold the product, I hadn't ever run an entire sales cycle in that environment. It was really hard for me to accelerate that process, right? And at that point, they hired me really to help accelerate revenue so we can go raise a Series A the following year. And so I didn't have a ton of resources at my disposal. Not like I could go out and hire XYZ person or hire some real expensive trainer or something like that. And so just one of those things, like I kind of had to figure it out, use a little bit of common sense, but also try to tap into, okay, well, what sort of tech resources might be available to us that we could tap into that could at least help augment some of the things that I'm trying to do a bit more effectively as a bit of a stopgap, if that makes sense. Um, so yeah, it's just all over the place.
So what's interesting, like these are two very different scenarios, two different environment. One, you inherit a team of green reps. You could mold them, if you will, the way you want, based on something that has some bad even a structure behind it, really product focus. And but you had that opportunity to inherit a team, good or bad. That was a different story. With a startup, you can, because you've been in the seat, you had some context that you can bring in with you and build your team. But the similarities I'm hearing here is that first and foremost, the most important thing was to always be focused on the foundation rather than just focusing on the product. Whether you're in the
Right.
side of startup that you don't know the product, you're new yourself, but foundation always wins. And the second part is like you always have some challenges with resources. Maybe with the bigger company is just a mindset or the fact that a senior leadership can push something. The other side is like, hey, I don't have tools and resources to do my job, which I would say like it really happens in both sides, especially for someone
Mm-hmm.
who's in the trenches doing the work, not only being a theoretical leader and just talk from the high horse, but actually getting your hand dirty and working with your reps. So speaking of technology, of course, like there are so many things you can do with tech. Yes, we are building an AI coach too. If I do advertising, so it helps for sure,
Mm-hmm.
no problem. You can do things faster. But if someone is new in the seat, so just imagine, someone is inheriting a team in a larger organization or being in a VP position for the first time in a fast-growing startup. And obviously, like lack of resources is always there. It's not that you have unlimited, buying from the top or all the budget in the world to go spend on tech. If someone wants to start tomorrow with whatever the hell they have, is there anything they can do without technology to at least help themselves to sustain their growth and also help their team being part of that growth?
Question, Michael. That's a tough question. I would say that that's a problem that most first time VPs or directors or whatever that come out of a bigger company, more established structure, whatever, and they move to a startup and they think that they can take the same playbook and adapt it to whatever environment they're in. And in some cases you can, right? If you're going from, one company that sells to X and you're going to another company that sells to X, cool. But a lot of these guys and gals will go from company A. So it's a good example for me. Like I went from EverQuote selling into insurance. Lease Cake was selling into commercial real estate and selling to franchises and things like that. I don't know anything about that. Not a damn thing. So, you know, I would say if you walk into an environment that is not where you're not like seller zero and you haven't even sold a single deal and there are customers, I would say the first thing you should do is start talking to customers. It's like, well, what prompted you to want to buy the solution? Like, what problem were you trying to solve when you engage with XYZ company? Because like you get that stuff from not only I used to talk to, you know, the directors or VPs that were ultimately the economic buyers, but they may not be the person that's in and out of the system on a daily basis, right? A lot of times it was a lease admin or something like that. So talking to them to me was far more valuable than talking to the head honcho. Because at the time, the guy or gal that's signing the check, like they're just there to sign the check or just approve it, right? They don't really care. It's like, if this is going to help Sally do her job and it's only going to cost me X, cool. Don't talk to me ever again. And that's totally fine. But I think that's one area that a lot of people miss is that there is so much invaluable information that comes out of just simply picking up the phone and talking to customers. So yeah, I mean, that's honestly the key thing to me that comes to mind, because I think that those types of conversations, you have a handful. Like, I don't think you need to sit there for days and weeks on end to talk to the entire customer base, but go talk to your top 5 customers, right? And if there's multiple people within that organization that are leveraging your product, try to better understand what value are they gaining from that, right? Because that I can take back to the team, that I can interpret as like, okay, cool. Like I can I can take action on that to some degree for the next conversation, right?
Mm. It makes a lot of sense, and I think that that will build your coaching even materials, if you will. So we're talking foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, let's just you mentioned gap selling. Great. Let's get the framework or methodology or whatever we call it. But what's most important? The buyer. Let's just understand like why they bought from us in the first place. Was it the experience alone? Was it the product? Was it certain functionality? How the discovery went? How the demo? So to your point, educating yourself as a leader firsthand to really understand like what they wanted it is a real case scenario in front of you. Then you can transfer this knowledge to your reps because they're dealing most probably with the same ICP. Although again, the challenges like before Series B, typically like we're all over the place, try to really figure out who we are working with.
Yeah,
But at least you see the patterns, and then your coaching
totally.
is relevant. It's not just about like
Right.
high level stuff and all butterflies and rainbows. Cool.
Yeah.
So let me ask you another question about this because many of our listeners might be first time VPs working with startups, maybe before even Series B. So they're
Mm-hmm.
in the process of building or refining the V0 playbook.
Mm.
And part of building that playbook is by doing, obviously. How do you ensure that, first and foremost, like what you're coaching your reps on, because there's still no structure, is of course, you speak with your clients, you learn about the product, and you most probably get involved with the sales anyways. But
Mm-hmm.
how do you make sure that you you're walking the path not only to help individuals build a skill set but build the repeatability around your practice? Because what I'm noticing is there's a big gap when you have this transition from, typically, like if we're talking about venture backed companies, from Series A to
Mm-hmm.
Series B, that VPs really struggle to find that repeatability, and they just start to think, oh, can your tool maybe help me build a playbook? You had to figure that out before. So I just wanted to hear from your perspective, like how should they go about this?
I mean, the current state of the world, pre-AI, okay, is you listen to calls or you do group role plays or whatever it might be to kind of figure out where those consistencies might be, right? And then from there, the sales leader is going to kind of take the best of it, kind of piece it together, and it's some really clunky thing. And then you kind of put it out into the universe, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, and then you kind of figure it out as you go, which sucks, by the way, sucks a lot. But I mean, one of the key things that I was looking for when you and I met was how do I get my reps to have conversations like the sales rep that I inherited the time. Like his conversations were good. Like his knowledge was good. There were certain things that we'd hit on every call, right? But when you would listen to his calls, there was no way to find consistency in those conversations. Mind you, he would cover a lot of those things, but they were never in any particular order or structure. Like it wasn't like there was a smooth journey. On every call, I need to know these 5 things every single time. And using that information to then figure out, like, hey, is that stuff even important to begin with? Which it should be if you're at that point, to some degree, it should be important. But how important? How do you use it? What are you going to then use that to build off of later? Because that's what I was really looking for, was like, how can I get something that's going to give me some kind of repository or something where it feeds the reps the key things that they want to cover depending on the type of call. Is it an intro call, discovery call, demo, whatever it might be, and just give them some guidance throughout there so they don't miss things. But I also selfishly wanted that information so that I could leverage that to build the playbook, because for all the time that I spent at EverQuote, and as successful as that business was, we never had a playbook. There was no playbook, zero playbook. And then when I got to LeaseCape, I hadn't come from an environment where I needed that to drive success to the team. But then I forgot. I was like, oh yeah, it's because I used to sell this stuff. And so I just kind of know it in and out. And so like, I am the playbook. Like I'm the walking playbook. I got it. Right. I just never really put it down on paper. And so it's a hard thing to do. Because like we talked about earlier, everybody kind of ingests information differently. Everybody kind of interprets that information a little bit differently. And then they execute against what they're learning differently. And so that how do you adapt that to each individual seller on the team to where you can still create consistency, but you're not building a team of robots. Like that was the thing I wanted to avoid, because I hate that. Like, I hate that overly scripted, like, you know, the person's just reading off a script, right? When they're on the call with you, like you just know it. And there's no authenticity that goes along with that conversation. Like, you know, you're on the phone with a seller, you know that they're asking these questions because they want to use it against you to sell something to you later, right? So I don't know if I'm ever going to really be able to answer this question or not. But yeah.
Look, I appreciate you sharing this openly, but I want to ask a follow-up question because it might actually help someone at the early stage startup, a first-time VP of sales. Look, this is not my target audience. I generally don't give a damn if someone buy this product with small seats or not, because this is not what we are targeting. But because you've been in that seat, I want to share your unfiltered opinion on this because I sometimes go on a call with the smaller, companies, the one that just passed, let's say Series A, or they're scaling. One of a common theme that I'm hearing is that, hey, look, dude, it's my first VP gig. I don't have my playbook ready. I'm already slammed. I'm hiring two, three more people. I don't have an enablement person. I don't have a ton of budget to buy things. I don't have a ton of time to figure out tools. And I think I'm going to get something like Fathom or Gong just to get the call recording. Look, I have some
Mm-hmm.
answers to that. Not necessarily answers. Like I kind of like to help them understand why this might not actually work, and you're spending money on your tiny budget on something that is just a
Yeah.
commodity that never going to get used. But I don't want to share that. I wanted to hear from
Yeah.
someone who's been in the seat. So if you can share this, with the audience.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, interestingly enough, at Least Cake, we did have a Gong type thing, right? And it was actually one of the first pieces of tech that I bought because in my mind, that's what I thought I needed. I just need to like see what these guys are saying and then I can fix it after. And that's the kiss of death. Because the problem in that world is that you have to wait until they're in a live selling conversation and potentially blow an opportunity to then course correct and properly enable them so that doesn't happen again, right? And so all those call recording things to me is it's more administrative. It's more like we have it and it's there and it gives me something to do when I've got some off time. But quite honestly, in a startup environment, when the hell did I have time to sit there and listen to call recordings, right? And then you try to look at the transcript and you don't have enough context. So you ultimately have to listen to the whole stinking call anyway, even though they sell you on this thing like, oh no, we'll put these things in so you can kind of skip around. It's like, no, you need the context because without context, how are you supposed to coach? But what the thing I was hated was there was nothing that I could do in the moment or nothing that I could really do leading up to that to better prepare them for those calls outside of the role plays. Yeah, role play with me or role play with your peer. And like those are so uncomfortable and they're not real selling conversations, right? You're playing a role. And so I always found that those just never really adapted all that well to a live selling environment. And so, what was intriguing about what you and I were talking about at the time, I was like, oh, like, okay, cool. So I can just make sure that, because like I just wanted to build, to your point, some level of repeatability. And I would have taken just very simple, I need these three things. As long as we know these three things, like we're moving in the right direction, right? But even that was a struggle with reps. And quite honestly, too, with Least Cake, I was managing both an SDR function, just pure prospecting, right? And they're just booking meetings. So it's different motion, different conversation, different type of coaching that was necessary for them to be successful. And then I'm overseeing AEs and peer sellers, right? And then I have customer success too, which is like a whole different animal, okay? So these are three different teams that have three different functions and focuses, and yet I had nothing for anybody, right? But yeah, I had the call recordings. Great. Everything's post-call. Everything's after the fact, right? And luckily, we never ran into an issue where, man, something went so sideways post-call that we couldn't come back and recover from it, thankfully. But I have to imagine that probably happens at a lot of companies today, right? Especially a lot of the bigger companies that have, 50, 100, 200, 500, 1,000 sales reps, right? And they're scattered across God knows however many managers. It doesn't matter if you got a repository full of sales calls. Like, what are you doing with it? And trying to then build a a training strategy or enablement strategy around that, everybody would just lean on like the old school basics. Like, all right, we're going to get into some role plays. All right, you're going to sell to them. You're going to sell to them, blah, 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 and then you're going to switch roles. And then we're going to talk about it after.
Sure, it's
Right.
effective.
So, yeah,
Must
I
be
mean,
more.
and it was painful for me because I knew that as a seller, that never helped me. It just never helped me. And like, I was never going to be my best in a role play with my peer or my manager. I mean, crap. If people role play, like when I would schedule a role play session with some of my team members, they're like scared and they're intimidated because they don't want to screw up or they think I'm sitting there to judge them. And I don't care who you are. You're always judging them. You're always judging them. But it's how do you grasp what the issue is and then be able to provide enough feedback where it doesn't feel like you're judging them? It's really hard to do. Like there's very few people on this planet, I would say, that have enough wherewithal and tact to be able to do that effectively without people hating their guts or waking up every day dreading walking in because it's role play day, right? So all I really wanted was something where, okay, can I give something to a rep based on their function, right? What does their role entail? And what are my expectations of that role? What are my expectations of the conversation I expect they have with every prospect and customer that they speak with? And then how can I put them in front of it so that they're in a judgment-free zone? Like, how do I get them in a position where they can be comfortable and they don't feel like they've got everybody just looking at them like, oh, I'm waiting for you to screw up. I'm just waiting, right? Because that's what it really is. Because like you're the person that's dreading, like you see the person going and you know what order they're going in and you're dreading it. Like you're hoping that they like just keep talking to the point where like time's up and I get skipped for the next day. Like that's not a productive environment to be in if you want to build a team of successful salespeople or customer success people or anybody that's customer facing, right?
It resonated a lot because we all experienced it. If you're in sales
Yeah,
for anything over 2, 3 years, you've been in these sessions, like
totally.
regardless of what kind of company you're working at, right? And typically, this one-on-one role plays to me barely happen. At least I didn't have that luxury. I never had
Mhm.
one-on-one role play sessions with anyone. Plus, I had it with my peers, and it was the weirdest thing ever because I want to be nice to you. You're my buddy. Or we
Right.
both try to be assholes, like acting like something that never happens in real life just to push you with good intentions. So hopefully you can get better. But the bigger problem to me is the feedback that you receive. If it's a peer-to-peer, let's say scenario, I'm not a CRO, I'm not a CFO. Okay, even if I'm a high-performing rep and I know the buyer persona, I'm still not that, buyer. So
Right.
that's the problem. Do you believe your reps burn leads practicing on client calls? When it comes to giving them one-on-one coaching sessions, just don't have the bandwidth so you get rid of them altogether? Or maybe you notice that your team spends a lot of time on non-revenue tasks like taking notes, updating CRM, or drafting emails? These are the exact challenges we solve for other revenue leaders like yourself. With Sell Me the Spend AI Coach, you can offer your reps role-play sessions at scale while automating one-on-one coaching sessions based on your best practices and methodology. Also, AI will take care of all their non-revenue tasks, like note-taking, CRM updates, draft the email for them, so they can focus on constant improvement while you're focusing on one thing and one thing only, revenue growth. If you're interested in learning more about the clients we are working with or use cases that might be beneficial to you, check us out at sellmethespend.ai. And another thing that when you look at like group settings, to me it's absolute toxic. I had one of the most successful Sandler trainers on the call. For 20 something years, he's consistently, working with the enterprise client. His confidence, he has his own business, so he doesn't need to play around. And he said something interesting. It's like group role play sessions are bullshit because typically you get one or two of these scenarios. You get high performing reps that come here and just to show off real quick and just say a few words and just get back to their work, add no value to anyone. Then you get those who are always their hands are up. I want to do. This is my turn. I want to do more. I want to do more. And again, you eat up many people's time because you just don't want to commit to that one-on-one setting. Let's do it in group. But worse than anything else, you get the ones who just uncomfortable. They feel uncomfortable on these calls. They screw it up, even if they do it
Mhm.
once. I was actually one of those. Funny
Same.
enough, I was on top of a chart in terms of real life performance, but we got to the first group role play session at this company, 40 people, including CRO, is sitting there. And we are talking about a new topic that we never actually got any training, any material on randomly. So the trainer just talked about it like for 5 minutes. All right, because we had a conversation before. Hey, Michael, get ready. I'm like, oh shit.
Yep.
CPO is here, CRO is here, VP is here. I'm done. I'm roasted. And I screwed it up.
Right.
So what it did to me was, first and foremost, that day was done. Like, I judged myself to the bone, and I was like, no calls, nothing, I'm done. And then I always had this like fear back in my head. Yes, I can perform when I talk to my clients, and I'm gonna keep doing it because I want to make money. I want to build my brand. I want to just grow, in whatever thing I'm doing in life. But I skipped every single group role play session from that day, and nobody gave me shit. By the way, why? Because I was performing. So
Because you're putting up numbers. Yep.
so again, I've seen this like firsthand. I'm surprised why companies are even doing it today, but I guess it is what it is, you know.
It's just like an established seller. It's really hard to unlearn bad habits. So a lot of the senior leadership at a lot of these companies that continue to do things that even like the things that people were doing 5, 10 years ago don't work today. Or a lot of it doesn't work today. You need to kind of adapt. But because they've seen success at whatever level, and now they're so disconnected from the customer, they're so disconnected from the day to day that they think like, wow, this is good. That's how I got it. Like that's how we built the business. We're $100 million company. Why can't this work still? Right? But then you have like your frontline leadership who is way closer. They have zero power, zero, like next to zero. Like you got a better shot at like trying to sell the freaking school nurse than you do like a sales manager at a tech company, right? And maybe that's not, maybe there's a few exceptions out there, right? But for the most part, like you have no buying authority, and like you have to go through. I mean, I remember anytime I wanted to get anything at EverQuote, and then good, bad, or indifferent, okay, is like I had to put together like a 10-page business case and then present it to a handful of stakeholders. But even in the middle, I'd have to present it to my VP or SVP or whoever I was reporting to at the time to make sure that I didn't make them look stupid, trying to, you know what I mean? And it just, at the end of it, I'm just like, I'm spending so much time just asking permission to buy something that's like $5,000.
That's even worth it.
Like, it's not worth it. Like I just probably lost way more than that by spending all this time doing it. I'm just going to figure it out myself. And I think that is a cycle that occurs more frequently than I would say a lot of senior leaders probably are aware of, right? Or if they're aware of it, they're just accepting it. And that's the story for a different day. But like that was a lot of the issues. And even as I moved into a director function, like one would think like going from leading 10 folks to 50 folks, right? And having some managers and all of that, like you'd have a little bit more stroke. No. But that was that particular environment. It's a little bit different. And quite honestly, the advantage that provided me was when I went to a startup, I learned how to figure things out fairly lean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when we talk about systems and process and stuff, that was just purely, again, being in that environment for so long, selling that stuff for years, you just get into a rhythm. You just kind of know it like the back of your hand. But moving into a new environment, I would say a lot of people, again, that come from a bigger company that have budget and stuff, and they go there and they're like, oh, you can't even spend $50 without, CFO approval or whatever it might be. It's really, really hard for them to adapt. And so, I think it would have been even harder for me in that transition had I not had that sort of learning experience, whereas like, okay, at least I know now that if I need something and I need something that bad, I need to be able to justify it. And I know how to justify it because I had to go through that painful experience before. But it would take a lot to force me to have to be like, listen, I think we really, really need this, right? Like, I think the first thing that I bought after the call recording stuff to me was like basic. I'm like, I need something, right? But then it was more so like looking at our systems and CRM and stuff like that. I'm like, this is not scalable. Like, we need to go do this. And so like putting together a plan, like, hey, we need to go implement Salesforce or whatever, which is again, story for a different day. But again, like I learned a lot about how to navigate those. And so like spending that time wisely, right? And really kind of getting to the edge of wherever I needed to get to before I really need to jump off, be like, okay, I need help. And the help isn't just more people or more money or whatever it is. It's like, I need X thing to be able to drive Y results, right? It's going to cost Z. And here's what I think is going to do to help us achieve our annual target or whatever it might be, right? But at the end of the day, there are some people that get into leadership for the money, which is ridiculous, by the way, because you can make way more money as a really, really good seller, like way more. Okay. But there's some people that do it for that. I did it just to be successful, like just to basically wake up and feel like, man, like I made impact. And ultimately I did it because I wanted to help other people achieve what they wanted to achieve in their career. Right. And so when you, as any kind of leader of people, like if you don't wake up every day and your intention is to try to help the people that you have either make more money, buy that first house, prepare for their first kid, they have a conversation about their career aspirations and they want to get into leadership, whatever, and you're not putting a plan in place, like, then what the hell's your point? Like, what's your purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I might be like getting off topic a little bit, so I apologize, but it's yeah, everything is still so post call stuff, right? It's like that's the tech way of trying to solve whatever problems you might have, but it's always after the event has already occurred. Or those real life one-to-one kind of things with peers or whatever, which is a nightmare. And or an expectation you're just going to spend your way out of whatever shit show that you just walked into, right?
Look, Chris, I appreciate you sharing this. Look, again, taking risk for someone new in the seat, comes with a price. Like regardless, like you make a bad decision, it affects the entire ecosystem. Like it's not just about like spending your budget on a wrong thing. It could cost you so many things.
Right.
If this is my last question for today, and I don't want it to be necessarily focused on a product they can buy today or implement to their environment.
Sure.
If there's only one thing new VPs can focus on when it comes to coaching, what would that be?
One thing, find the problem. So one of the things I've learned over the years is like, you can have all the information about the product known to man and still absolutely suck at selling it. Because ultimately, if you can't align a feature benefit to a pain or problem, then like you're dead. And what I realized more so when I moved into my first startup after EverQuote was, if I asked 4 different people, what problem do we solve? Guess what I got?
None.
4 different answers. 4 different answers, right? Product had an opinion. CEO had an opinion, right? The CS manager had an opinion. The sales rep had an opinion, whatever. And it's like, how do you navigate that? And then how do I then take that and like enable a brand new rep or SDR or whomever to come in off the street and sell this and get in front of customers? Like that's impossible. And so, well, maybe not impossible, but really, really hard. So to me, like the biggest thing that if I could do it all over again, that's what I would have wanted to figure out probably even before I took the job, to be quite honest with you, is like ask that question in your interview cycle to every single person that you talk to. Okay. Because that's going to be very, very telling in terms of what environment you're going to walk into.
Mm-hmm.
And like what you need to prepare for. If they all give you different answers, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It just means like, well, shit, I need to focus on this because we all need to be aligned. Because if I have product thinking or doing one thing, I have CS doing, thinking, saying another thing, and my salespeople are doing, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So to build continuity and consistency, everyone has to rally around the problem, and it's the customer at the end of the day. And so, and there's typically 2 or 3 key problems that you solve per persona, right? So it's nailing the problem, and then who do you solve it for? And to me, really too, it's trying to figure out like, what is the path of least resistance in terms of who you want to focus on? Because that was the other key problem that we had early on, is like, we kind of were selling to anybody that was willing to like take a demo with us, right? Like the business was built on one ICP and one demo. Ended up, that was a really competitive sort of landscape. A lot of well-established companies in that space were getting crushed. And then figured out from that, we figured out, well, crap, like there is an underlying problem that's not being solved
Mhm.
for a persona that's really, it was really like the owner of the business. So the franchise owner, the restaurant owner, or, whatever business it was that had a few different locations and managing all these properties. And it's like, well, how do I rally around that piece to ultimately help my team relay to those people when they're having conversations like, here's how I help people just like you, right?
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
but everything starts with a problem. Then you figure out what the problem is, like who you are solving that problem for. And is that problem consistent across multiple spheres of the organization, right? So we would run into, real estate and operations and finance. Like those are kind of the three departments that we would sell into. But finance had their own problems they were trying to solve. Real estate and ops, they actually had some consistency because there was some overlap there. So I was like, okay, well, that seems like a good place to start, right? And then that just kind of snowballed from there. And it just helps to heighten the conversations or elevate the conversations that reps have with prospects. And prospects will tend to open up to you. Because good, like, come on, man, like you and I, we both get probably solicited on LinkedIn and email all day, every day. Everybody's got the secret sauce to solve all of our problems. Okay. And it's like you get on a call with some of them, and all they want to do is talk about themselves, talk about their product, right? And then they ask you some very surface level questions like, oh, well, how many people do you have on your team? Oh, you ever considered something like this before? It's like, dude, do you even know why I'm here? Do you understand like what it is that I'm trying to solve for by being on this call with you and taking 30 minutes of my life to freaking talk to you? So anyway, that's the longest way possible to say, start with the problem, focus on the problem, understand the problem that you are solving broadly, then distill it down to who do you solve it for? And then if you don't already have some kind of guidance or focus on any particular, not so much industry, but really buyer persona, um, really figure out like of that core problem, who do you solve it for? And like, can you accomplish engaging with customers within different departments or different roles or functions and align on the same problem? And then from there, then you can sort of expand on that, right? But like start at the core problem. Like, why do you exist? Like, it's kind of my favorite question to ask in interviews now. Why did you even start this? Why do you exist? Why does anybody care? However, which way you want to position it, right? And and even so now, like when I interview reps, because we're a growing company, I've been very fortunate that we've walked into an environment where like a really strong product. I understand the problem that we're solving. Okay, there are future event problems that we're solving. There are current state problems that we're solving, and able to articulate that really, really clearly, and then being able to share that with the reps so they understand. Cool, like I get it, right? And we can build repetition really quickly, but it all starts with that problem.
Focus on the problem. You have it already.
Yes.
Chris, appreciate you taking the time. If someone wants to reach out to you, have a conversation, can they and how? No AI automated,
Yeah, please
based
don't.
on.
Yeah. I mean, you can hit me up on LinkedIn. Unless the only people I don't accept on LinkedIn are the people that are blatantly connecting with me to sell me something, and I already know it. You can even leave your message blank, and I know that you're going to try to sell me something. So I would say if you're gonna try to connect with me, just put a light note in there. It doesn't have to be a freaking novel, but just introduce yourself, something. Give me a sense of like how I can help you. I'm more than happy to help you. I don't care if I know you or I don't know you. If I can be of any value or help, like happy to do it. But don't try to pitch slap me, or I will block you into infinity.
There we go. All right, guys. I hope you learned something today, and I appreciate you, Chris, again for joining. And I see you soon. Bye for now.